For 3 days, members of the Milosevic family had been trying to contact Rad Miller, or Rad, as she liked to be called. But calls to Rad and her de facto husband, Tony, had gone unanswered. And for a family who spoke to each other every day, it was a matter of deep concern.
Rad!
There was a phone call made from Tony's employer that he hadn't turned up for work for a couple of days, and they were quite concerned as it wasn't like Tony not to be at work. The car was in the driveway and nobody came to the door, and Dara started to get a bit worried.
Dara was Rad's 18-year-old sister.
She looked through the window and noticed some paper burnt around the stove, and the stove was actually glowing, the hot plates on the stove. She wanted to break the window and go in, but her boyfriend stopped her and told her that they would call the police and get the police there. He didn't want her to go in.
I was on duty in Canberra on the 31st of March 1984 with another detective, another young detective, and we were the only two detectives on in Canberra for that particular day. I received a call on the police radio from our operations room that the police officer in attendance had smashed a hole with his baton in the back door of the house and entered. There was a strong smell of petrol in the house. It was obvious that there was an attempt to set the place on fire. In one of the back bedrooms, there were 3 bodies, 2 adults, male and female, and a small girl. They'd been piled up and they'd been doused in petrol. And in another bedroom, there was a young male child, obviously all victims of gunshot wounds. We were only young people 20 years ago ourselves, and we all had young children as well, so it was pretty horrific, you know.
I was actually elsewhere with another sister, Rad's other sister, and we were in a nightclub at the time, and a friend had come up and said to the other sister that something terrible had happened to Rad and Tony, that we had to leave.
An entire family had been wiped out. Rad Miller Milosevic, her de facto husband Tony Baker, and their 2 small children, Danny and Lisa, were dead.
When they took us to Richardson, they made us wait in the car. The house was all taped around, and somebody had come out and told Rad's sister that they'd been shot and they were found in the house, Rad, Tony and the kids. She was just out of her mind. She just was screaming and so upset after going through it 2 years previously, losing Marion and Lily.
Tragedy had already struck the Milosevic family. Mariana and Lily, Rad Miller's younger sisters, died just before New Year's Eve of 1981 in a car accident.
You couldn't comprehend another 4 from the same family, Marion and Lily, and now Rad and Tony and the kids. It was just unbelievable.
The surrounding the case, they say, are extremely unusual. The police broke into this house at about 9:30 last night to find the bodies of a young man, a young woman and their 2 small children. The bodies were all in various parts of the house. There was no sign of any struggle, but kerosene had been doused on the walls.
There was no break and enter on the house. The house had been locked up. There were no broken windows. It was quite calm as far as that was concerned. And there was evidence that the offender had attempted to clean up blood stains with a bottle of Jif from the kitchen. And in their attempts to clean it up, they'd made more of a mess, so that the person just put cushions over the blood stains and sort of hid things.
The murderer also tried to hide his tracks by attempting to set fire to the house.
The stove consisted of two small hot plates towards the back of the range, and at the front of the range was a sort of a square grill-type hot plate arrangement. And the two back hot plates were glowing red hot, but not the front one. The person who turned the stove on had, in their haste, had turned all the knobs the same way, and the hot plate at the front where he'd stuffed newspaper around the grill didn't ignite because the switch was turned in the wrong direction. It was on low instead of high.
The scientific squad has been trying to piece together some story or pattern. They believe the shooting could have taken place as long ago as Friday.
But a search inside the house suggested it could have been earlier. The failed attempt to burn down the house meant that Radmilla's diary remained intact, a diary she wrote up religiously every night.
And it was just an old school book that she used to write up the day's events in. And the last entry was dated Wednesday, the 28th of March. And the entry was that her husband and a guy called Tomo were listening to the radio for the football that was on the midweek game. And that was the last entry. So we knew we had another person in the house at that time, the last time that the people were obviously alive.
This morning, from their mobile field unit, the police conducted a door knock, but very few of the neighbours knew anything about the family, and none of them had heard any of the gun blasts.
But people had seen a distinctive car travelling backwards and forwards to the house after the Wednesday. And we had some information there that indicated that perhaps that car might have belonged to the person Tomo. So we needed to find out who Tomo was and where Tomo was now.
These investigations are continuing into this evening. They're still interviewing the family's friends and relatives, but haven't determined even a possible motive.
It had now been some hours since the bodies of Rad, Tony and their children had been found shot dead in their home. With no known reason as to why they were murdered, detectives needed to speak with the last person who had seen them alive. And that was a bloke called Tomo.
We eventually identified Tomo as a guy called Alan Thompson, who was a close family friend. In fact, he was a long-term mate of the male victim of the scene. I think they used to play football together.
He was my big brother. He was do anything for me, trusted him. I guess he was the big brother I never had, and he was one of the family. I think he actually taught me to drive at 13, 14 years of old illegally along the road, and he'd drive us to a school disco. He'd go home and he'd come back and pick us up when we were finished. So we were always with Tomo.
Other diary entries indicated that this Tomo had turned up on a regular basis and he would play with the kids, and there were some comments in there about him eating all of their food. So we knew that he was a regular visitor to the house. He was also a boyfriend of one of the two sisters who were killed in a road vehicle accident some years prior.
Tomo met Mariana one night. Him and a friend were chucking laps of the main street, and Mariana and one of her sisters were in the city, and they happened to pull over and start speaking to them and talking, and I guess it just went from there.
Before long, the young couple moved in together and were hardly ever seen apart. So when Mariana died in a car crash less than 2 years later, Alan turned to her elder sister Rad and her de facto husband Tony for company. Most of his days and nights were spent here at their house.
We also established that he owned a motor vehicle similar to the description of the one that the neighbours had told us about, that was coming and going from the premises.
So was Tomo a possible suspect, or simply the last person to see his friends alive?
My partner and I travelled to Queanbeyan and were actually greeted at the door by Alan. And when I introduced myself and said who I was, I'm the bearer of bad news. I said, I've just come from the house of your friends in Richardson. We found them all dead.
At the crime scene, ballistics experts had found spent casings and bullets that indicated the murder weapon was a .22 calibre rifle.
was asked whether he owned a rifle. He took us to a shed in the back of his parents' home where he unlocked it and produced a .22 rifle. And we came back to Canberra to police headquarters and handed the gun over to our ballistics expert.
All right. Check and clear? Great. Thanks, Eric.
They took us to the local police station, then proceeded to question us on Tomo, asking us if he had guns or if, was there any reason why, we would think that it would be him. And I just said Tomo wouldn't do it, Tomo didn't do it. He wouldn't do something like that.
At the forensic laboratory, the ballistic expert fired bullets from Thompson's gun. Under the microscope at 20 magnifications, the bullets were then compared to those found at the crime scene to either identify or eliminate the rifle Thompson had given to the police.
What we're looking at is a test sample on the left-hand side and the exhibit on the right-hand side, and we're looking for lines that are created by marks that are left on the interior of the barrel and the land itself, and they emboss those particulate marks on the lands. They're a unique set of marks because they're like a ballistic fingerprint. So they're unique only to this one particular firearm, and that allows us to make an identification or an elimination. In this case, we've made an identification.
It was the following day that we had some information come forward from our inquiries that Thompson had gone to a petrol station in the outskirts of Queanbeyan and purchased a tin of petrol. That tin was actually found at the crime scene, and it was him coming back to the scene that the neighbours saw the car. So it became obvious that Alan Thompson was our offender, and we subjected him to interview, produced the evidence, and initially he denied any involvement in the murders of those people. But then he said, I went out to the car and got the gun and just come inside and just started shooting. But he said he didn't know what he was doing, he was just randomly firing throughout the house. Well, that didn't match with the scene that the ballistic expert had recreated. It was more deliberate firing and aiming rather than just shooting around wantonly and not knowing what you were doing.
As the bullet exits the muzzle of a gun, the pressure behind it blows gunshot residue through the barrel and into the air.
You can just confirm that's hard up against contact.
The closer the rifle to the target, the more concentrated the gunshot residue around the bullet entry hole.
Firing!
The further away, the less dense it becomes. So when the experts compared the results they got from Thompson's gun to the gunshot residue around the bullet holes of his victims, they were able to establish how far away Thompson was from each family member when he pulled the trigger.
Firing!
We established that, I think the ballistics expert established that the offender had first fired from the entry hallway of the house across to where an armchair was in the lounge room where the woman was sitting with the young girl on her lap. It's then that the husband started to lift himself up from the chair, and the offender shot him then in the chest, and he then tried to get out of the lounge room, and he went around a small wall into the hallway, and he was shot then at point blank range to the back of the head. And then the little girl who had obviously fallen off her mother's lap, she was shot in the lounge room on the floor from a short distance, and we believe that he dragged those bodies up the hallway then and piled them up in the back bedroom. And then at some stage that night, the male child was shot in bed at point blank range. So it was a callous, outright murder.
24-year-old Thompson was charged with 4 counts of murder, but pleaded not guilty at the trial.
I didn't want to believe that Tomo did it. It was mainly sitting in court and listening to the evidence and the forensic evidence, everything that went with the case.
Thompson was found guilty and was sentenced to 4 terms of life imprisonment to be served concurrently.
And we never ever found out the motive for the murder. But I think following the death of his girlfriend, he sort of attached himself to Rad Miller, and I don't have the qualifications to talk about people and why they do certain things, you know, so I don't know. I just think that there was from what I've seen and from what I've read in her diary, I think that Tomo was a little bit infatuated with Rad Miller for whatever reason, and she was rejecting that advancement.
But it wasn't over for Tomo. One policeman had a gut feeling that would likely turn Thompson into one of Australia's worst killers of the time.
Going through photo albums in the house, we found newspaper reports involving the deceased two sisters who'd been killed some years before in a motor vehicle accident.
The two girls, aged 14 and 17, died when this car left the road and slammed into a tree. They were incinerated as the car's fuel tank exploded.
An inquest found it was an accident. The car hit a tree and burst into flames. The driver, who escaped unhurt, was close family friend Alan Thompson.
The concern was if he had in fact got away with it, it resulted in the deaths of the other four that should never have occurred.
When Alan Thompson gunned down Radmila Milosevic and her family, investigators discovered that he was also the driver in a car crash that took the lives of her two younger sisters. Was it sheer coincidence that Thompson's name was linked to the deaths of three sisters? Or was there more to it than met the eye?
Thompson alleged that he'd been driving towards Canberra, Coomera to Canberra, on the highway with the two girls in the car.
What about the ice cream party? Yeah, I have some ice cream. You didn't get that.
High beam of another oncoming vehicle caused him to veer off the road. He immediately got out of the car, the driver's side. He went to the front of the vehicle and saw flames coming from under the bonnet. He ran around to the left-hand side of the vehicle and attempted to get the girls out of the vehicle. He was engulfed in flames, and subsequently the two girls died in a motor vehicle accident.
I was contacted at work and said that Marianne and Lily had died in the accident and Tomo had been burned. Tomo had burns to his arms, lower arms, where he had tried to get the girls out. The day of the funeral, he was very withdrawn. He wouldn't speak to anybody. A few of us went up to put our arms around him and he more or less pushed us away and he was just very reserved. He'd sometimes wake up through the night screaming out for Mariana, and we just tried to be there for him.
2 months after the girls' funeral, a coronial inquiry into the crash found the deaths of the sisters to be accidental. But Rick Nines and his partner Tom McQuillan had their doubts.
Right, the brief told us that there'd been a motor vehicle accident, simple motor vehicle accident. Looking at the brief, there weren't sufficient answers to say, well, yes, this was a simple motor vehicle accident. There were questions that needed to be answered in order to corroborate his story.
We were very fortunate. The accident squad at the time took a lot of photographs of the vehicle accident, and when you looked at the photographs, I was concerned that the damage didn't correlate with the high impact alleged by Thompson at the time.
Travelling at the speed that he said he was travelling, one would have thought that there would have been a lot more damage, and there was insufficient damage.
Thompson said he was driving at 45 miles, or 60 kilometres per hour, when he was blinded by headlights and went off the road, hitting a tree. But according to experts from General Motors Holden, this could not have been the case.
Now, that was quickly diffused by the engineers who said that didn't hold water. They weren't happy with that story at all. And they looked at the photographs and they all put the impact speed down to about 15 mile per hour.
So that said, well, why would someone do that? Would it be to protect themselves possibly? And maybe the accident had been staged. So we decided to test our theory out that it was a staged accident and to see what sort of damage would occur by rolling the vehicle into a tree, because we didn't have the tree out at the site, it had been cut down.
So we bought an HR Holden and we took it to the police driver training area and we got it on a slope. And we marked the distance between a tree that we believe met the dimensions of the tree on the highway, and then we ran the vehicle down towards the tree on a large number of occasions to get the speed right. And the distance had to be spot on to recreate the 15 mile per hour speed on impact.
We had it all planned. Everyone had their role. I think my role was to time it from memory. Rex was to observe. And we had a driver who was rigged up, all padded up, crash helmet light, ready to crash it in. But once he'd seen how far we were going down the slope and the speed, there was a little bit of, well, perhaps this might be a bit dangerous. So he sort of reneged, and it was left for volunteers, and the only volunteer left was Rick Ninnis.
Well, I believed it had to be done. Someone had to do it, so I was the man at the time, so I had to do it.
He was placed in the vehicle and sent off on his way and crashed it into the tree.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, go!
But it was probably important I did do it, actually, because it gave me a feel for what actually transpired in that car. And the impact was not severe at all. You certainly knew you'd hit something, but it wasn't severe enough that you would think 2 people would die. So it was supported very much so that was about the speed the vehicle was travelling when Thompson hit the tree with the 2 girls in it.
In our minds, we had to be certain exactly what was going on. If we weren't certain, how could we show that to someone else? We did it because we had to know.
But while the similarities between the crash test and the damage to Thompson's car did put a dent in his story, it wasn't anywhere near enough evidence to overturn the original verdict of accidental death. For that, they would need to get answers from an arson expert. Had the car burst into flames? Or was it deliberately lit?
And they locked me up for a day in a room with the video and the photos and said, we'll be back at 4 o'clock, tell us what you think.
When Detective Rick Ninnis began his journey into whether Thompson's accident was indeed what he claimed,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, go!
he never expected that he'd be putting his own safety on the line. And yet, it wasn't enough to prove Thompson was a fake or a murderer. His focus was now on the fire that incinerated the girls and how it really started.
The coroner's initial finding was that the fire had started under the bonnet of the car. An explanation for the fire was that there's a spring sitting across the battery to hold it down. It actually had contact with one of the terminals and arced, causing a spark to ignite the fumes under the bonnet. Now, photographs where the vehicle's on the back of a tow truck going away still indicated the headlights are on.
Now, that would seem a little bit incongruous if the battery is supposed to have started the fire. If you look at the damage in the engine compartment where the fire was supposedly started, you see some heat damage to the hoses and the wiring, but you don't see any actual burning. A lot of the wiring would be just bare wiring if it did survive at all, that you wouldn't have any insulation on the wiring. I'd expect the hoses and the fan belts to be burned away. They would have to for a fire to burn that long to get through the firewall. In fact, there are parts of the firewall that haven't been affected by the fire at all.
The damage from the fire seemed to be more inside the vehicle rather than in the motor. The motor seemed to be still in working order for a fire of that velocity. So It didn't add up. Why is there a fire inside the cabin, but yet the engine seems to be okay, and that's where the fire was alleged to have started.
Thompson had alleged that within minutes, seconds of him getting out of the car, the fire had spread from the engine to the passenger compartment. So, to corroborate or reject his story, the detectives decided to replicate the fire.
You got the stopwatch going?
Thank you, mobile board.
I'm here. Pretty good fire. That's what we wanted.
Starting to drip through now at the bottom. It starts to drip.
That's got more oxygen food in it too. We initially poured that petrol under the bonnet. What we thought would have been the amount spilled out of a carburetor. There you go, Tom. There you go.
40 seconds.
That petrol certainly did ignite after we put flame to the petrol, but it extinguished itself very quickly because it couldn't travel anywhere. And we subsequently added more fuel and kept trying to do it to try and get that vehicle to be engulfed in flames to a large extent. But you virtually had to douse that car in petrol to get it to ignite.
That's a bit more like it.
And that took quite an amount to be able to get it through the firewall of the vehicle and into the cabin.
You on, Tommy?
4.5 minutes.
The wiring under the dash, it's got to get that.
Got to burn that away.
The dash is the thing that'll really start to smoke.
Cars will catch fire, but it's a fairly high impact speed that will do it to rupture all the fuel lines, the fuel tank, and to get it up and running to a high burning degree. You've got to have a lot of accelerant around it to fuel the flames.
15 minutes now. Yeah, 15 minutes.
So to support Thompson's story that in fact within a few seconds of the vehicle impacting he had a car totally on fire, but we couldn't establish how it would have happened. It just couldn't have happened the way he said it did.
But what we also found was that there would have been time for someone to get out. This was the other thing. That was the reason why the firewall was there.
You reckon you get one of inside the car at the 30-minute mark?
And by timing it, we thought, well, no, it just doesn't add up. Again, another part of his story, not being able to get in. You should have been able to get in because it took us quite some amount of petrol to be able to say that the cabin would have caught fire.
45 minutes is up.
Right.
In his original statement following the collision in 1982, Thompson claimed the container he was carrying in the car was empty. But when detectives Nines and McQuillan confronted Thompson with their doubts about his version of events,
Changed his story slightly, but only slightly, just enough to give us a reason why there was accelerant in his vehicle and why a fire should have occurred.
he told them that he'd bought the petrol for his mum's lawnmower in the afternoon and had forgotten to give it to her.
He said it was in the car and it must have fallen over and caught on fire.
Thompson didn't say anything at the time because he didn't want to get blamed for fire in the car. So, were the detectives barking up the wrong tree? Or were their instincts right? The answer was right under their nose, but they were yet to see it. Alan Thompson initially claimed there was no petrol in his car the night his girlfriend and her younger sister were incinerated in a motor vehicle accident. 3 years later, he changed his story, saying he did have a container of petrol in the car and it must have fallen over. So, had Thompson lied because he didn't want to be blamed for the fire? Or had he perjured himself at the inquest for another reason?
If you look at a photo of the tree where the car was wrapped around the tree, you'll see that there's a fire below the level of the vehicle. Now, how could that possibly happen if the fire was in the engine bay? It's more consistent, and the photo actually shows this, of a flammable liquid spill running and burning down through the folds of the metal where the car's been damaged. Obviously, I can't say exactly how much petrol had been used, but what I can say is it would have to be in the order of litres inside and outside. So you're looking at quite a few litres of petrol spread around inside and outside that vehicle.
The case was getting stronger and stronger as we went, and we believe we were heading towards a prima facie case against Thompson.
But the most damning indication that the accident was a cover-up was hidden among the photos that had papered the walls of the detective's office for the last 6 months.
You can look at something for quite a long time and not notice something. And all of a sudden it hit us that looking at the females, we noticed that there was some unexplained fluid escaping from the skull.
One of the photographs had a distinct round hole in one of the skulls, and we kept looking at it. Suddenly we become very curious about this hole.
If you look at the photos very closely, it's not all that clear, but you can see that there's a lot of damage to the skulls. Now, it is reported both at crematoriums and I believe in the Russian Revolution that you can get skulls exploding in fires. And when that happens, it's mainly because the fire is very quick and very hot. There's tremendous steam pressure builds up in the cranium, and therefore only one thing can happen, the skull will blow open. Now, if you look at the skull damage in these, that's not consistent with that. They look to me like exit wounds of projectiles, in other words, bullets, and at least in one of the skulls, an entry wound that was very strongly suggestive that these two girls have been shot in the head.
In the Supreme Court today, the tragic story of 3 Canberra sisters unfolded. The Director of Public Prosecutions, Ian Temby QC, said merely the fact that Thompson had been convicted of the murder of one of the sisters was enough to order a new inquest into the deaths of the other 2. He said such an inquest would allay public disquiet and set the record straight. Mr Temby said new expert evidence contradicted Thompson's version of the crash, how fast he was going and where in the car the fire started. He said Thompson had now admitted he was carrying a container of petrol, and previously he'd denied that. Dennis Palmer, for Thompson, said the evidence was not new nor of substance and pointed to the cost of holding a new inquest.
The only thing left to do was to exhume the bodies and see if there were any forensic evidence available from the bodies.
Now, if Thompson's story is right, there should have been burning or scarring of the larynx inside the bodies and the lungs of the young girls if they were alive, even though they might have been unconscious. You know, we certainly needed that sort of evidence to substantiate a charge to homicide against him.
That order was given, the exhumation was undertaken, and subsequently an examination of those bodies revealed gunshot wounds.
Bullet wounds were found in one or both of the sisters' bodies after they were exhumed from the Gungahlin cemetery.
Bullet wounds that were consistent with being from a .22 calibre rifle. The same calibre Alan Thompson used when he murdered the girl's older sister, Rad Miller, and her family.
At the post-mortem examination, the doctor found that there was no burning in the larynx or the internal organs, and established beyond doubt that they'd both were deceased at the time of the fire. Forensic Service also found that there was a coating of lead which was left behind as a bullet passed through the skull, inside the skull. So it totally supported the fact that the girls had been shot at or in the vehicle. They'd been deceased prior to the fire of the vehicle.
So in fact, by pulling that brief, just as out of mere interest for a start off, it just built. And it became a rolling ball for us, and the further we rolled it, the greater the divergence.
But what really went on the night the 2 girls were murdered? What triggered Thompson to shoot his girlfriend and her younger sister?
Leading up to the accident, Mariana came to work and spoke to her sister. It was basically the only time she really told us that she was scared of him.
Mariana Milosevic and Alan Thompson were boyfriend and girlfriend. When she died in a car accident, where he was the driver, Thompson turned to her older sister Radmilla for comfort. 15 months later, he killed her and her family. With Thompson's name linked to both events, police and forensic investigators re-examined the car crash that had been written off as an accident. Alan Thompson's secret was exposed, and the truth of what really happened that fatal night was finally uncovered.
He's talking shit now. Can you just stop yelling at her?
I'll do what I want, all right?
Excuse me.
The younger sister had come over to stay with them for the weekend.
Why are you being such an arsehole for?
And there'd been some sort of pending separation. The young girl wanted to break off with him, and he really didn't want that to occur. We believe that the young girl was there to be a witness or support her sister in the breakup.
I think he killed the girls in the car because Mariana wanted to leave him. Mariana had come into work and said that, you know, he was starting to frighten and she was getting scared of him and she didn't want to be with him anymore. Maybe if he wasn't going to have her, nobody was. Why he decided to take Lily, to take Rad, to take Tony and the children, I don't know.
Well, there's a definite connection, a modus operandi on what he was doing in both murders. There was a 22 involved in headshots in the victims, and the fact that there was fire used in both occasions to conceal the crime. So we believe there's a distinct correlation between the two offences.
2 years after he murdered the family, and 4 years after the original inquest into the deaths of the girls, Alan Thompson was found guilty of deliberately killing his girlfriend Mariana and her sister Lily.
He fooled a lot of people. He came across as the nice guy, the caring guy, and the Milosevic family trusted Tomo. Tomo was like their own, but they knew after the Richardson murders that he was responsible.
Thompson was given a life sentence for each girl's murder, to be served concurrently with the 4 already imposed.
I got the most satisfaction when Mr. Thompson was convicted, because it was finalisation for the Milosevic family. I felt really sorry and deeply on their behalf, because here was a lady that had lost so many members of her family for no valid reason.
She lost out of her family 3 daughters, a son-in-law and 2 grandchildren. It was fairly horrific for one mother who fought and battled and brought those children up on her own all that time, to have this cove come along and just take them away like he did.
Life for them now is 20-odd years later, it's still like yesterday to them. I mean, I know that there's not a day that goes by that any of them that are left don't think of Rad, Tony, the kids, Lily, Marina. He's really hurt them and really destroyed their family. My thoughts of Tomo are completely different to my thoughts of when I was a young teenager. I don't like him anymore. I hate him, I guess, as much as they do for what he's done to them.
In their own way, the family and Bronwyn have erased Alan Thompson from their lives.
Tomo's name was put on Marina's headstone. It had loved by Alan. They believed then that she was very much loved by him and him by her, but the name was removed. It was scratched off.
We no longer exist for eye for an eye in our society today, and you can't bring people back, you can't turn the clock back. But I think people in society today like to see those who are involved in those sorts of crimes to be punished.
Thompson has been behind bars for the last 20 years and is currently serving his time in a minimum security prison.
Hopefully, people like that should never be released back into society.
Alan Thompson's a cold fish with no emotion. There is nothing inside of him, I don't believe. Yes, the best description I could give you is just a cold fish.
The triple murder of Jennifer, Sarah and Adrian DeGrucci would baffle police with its apparent lack of motive. But finding the killer was possible. The father of forensics, Edmund Lockhart, wrote in 1910 that every contact leaves a trace. And in solving this crime, those words were never so true.
Matthew come from over the road and he looked in a distressed state, you know, sort of in a bad way, and as he got close he said there's something wrong with Mum and Sarah.
Something wrong with Mum and Sarah?
Sarah being an epileptic. I thought Jenny was having a bit of problem giving her the medicine. She just wanted someone to help her. I went in the front door. I seen Jenny's door just slightly ajar, so I thought I'd go up there and see if she's in a bedroom. I walked to the door, called out to Jenny. Had no reply, so I pushed the door open. The bedroom was dark. I seen a lump on the bed and I don't know, I just thought she was just going to jump up and go boom or something like that. So I walked over beside the bed, grabbed hold of the blanket and pulled it back, and that's when I found Jenny. I just couldn't wait to get out of there. That's when I called out to my father-in-law and told him to ring the police and ambulance.
We were met by a young male that had walked out of the house. He was crying. He was saying things like, "What's happened? Who's done this?"
18-year-old Matthew DeGrucci was totally distraught and was immediately taken to hospital. Inside the house, members of his family were dead.
When I first got there, it was around 9 o'clock or thereabouts, and went into the house. I had a look at the first bedroom, which is the master bedroom, and I saw a deceased adult female. I then moved down a hallway towards the second bedroom, where I saw a deceased teenage female. We then searched the remainder of the house, and we entered through a door into the garage, and that's where we found the deceased form of Adrian. The injuries were horrific. They were quite distressing, actually, to view. Not something that you'd want anyone really to have to see.
When I arrived at the crime scene, the police showed me the bodies of 3 deceased people. I think with Jennifer DeGruchy, she was lying in bed with the blankets and sheets partially up over her. There was a set of glasses on a bedside table nearby that to me looked as if she'd hopped into bed and had her reading glasses on and maybe had turned the light off, put her glasses beside her and had gone off to sleep, and perhaps after that time was attacked.
There was not a large amount of blood spatter in the room, which was basically inconsistent with the degree of the trauma which had been inflicted on the victim. It was quite likely that something had been placed over her head at the time that she was attacked. However, we did see some very small blood staining on the wall and on the bedhead behind the deceased, which did appear to us to be unusual in its shape and its location.
I examined Sarah and found that she was lying on her bed with a set of Walkmans nearby and was listening to maybe some music or something like that. So it made me feel, if Sarah didn't hear anything, and presumably she didn't, maybe she was then attacked.
Again, with Sarah's room, there were similar circumstances in relation to the amount of blood staining which was evident. There was, in our opinion, relatively small amounts of blood staining, and again it appeared likely that something had been placed over her head at the time of the attack.
Adjacent to Sarah's body was a blood-stained pillow, which seemed to have come from another part of the house. It didn't look like one of the pillows that she'd slept on. I wondered whether that pillow had been used to maybe partially smother her, or it might have been a combination of the person or persons involved tried to smother her and at the same time were bludgeoning her about the head.
Having examined the injuries to Jennifer and Sarah, Dr. Carla found evidence that 15-year-old Adrian was also a victim of a surprise attack.
It looked to me like Adrian was working in the garage and might have been doing some repair work on a chair. There was some woodwork glue around and the chair was upturned. I thought, though, that not only that, but looking at Adrian's injuries, particularly at the back of his head, seemed to suggest to me that perhaps the attacker came in and launched a blitz-type attack or a very rapid attack on Adrian's head at the back. There was also blood on the ceiling of the garage, and it had to me the characteristics of what's called cast-off blood. In other words, it's blood that's on a already bloodied weapon that's been used in an attack on somebody. And when that weapon is brought back or raised upwards in a rapid way, any blood that's on that weapon is literally cast off that weapon and strikes things like the ceiling or the wall or any other objects that happen to be nearby.
It gives us an indication of where the assailant had actually been standing and also in what position the victim had been at the time of being struck.
Who had so violently attacked and murdered this family? And what was the murder weapon that had been used? The victims themselves would hold the answers.
Police are mystified by the horrific murder of a mother and her 2 teenage children battered to death in their Wollongong home. Their bodies were discovered this morning by another son who was away for the night. The woman's husband, who works in Sydney, is returning to the house tonight.
The woman's 19-year-old son collapsed in shock after discovering Jenny DeGruchy's battered body in the main bedroom of the house when he arrived home around 9 this morning. In a second bedroom, he found his 13-year-old sister Sarah also dead. Her 15-year-old brother Adrian was later discovered in the garage. Forensic experts searched the house for clues this morning.
There were a couple of unusual aspects of the scene. In Jennifer's bedroom, which was the main bedroom of the premises, there was a relatively large area of carpet which had been cut from the floor, which in itself was unusual because the house was only relatively new. There were also a couple of smaller pieces which had been cut, one from near the base of the bed and another near the doorway. These, of course, pose questions to the investigator of why has the carpet been cut.
Whoever had taken that piece of carpet wanted it removed because it may have indicated to us after testing something that would identify him. Maybe the assailant had spilt some blood, and for that reason that person had to remove that carpet.
And in the hallway, there was further evidence of the killer possibly covering his tracks.
The hallway was subjected to a very detailed examination. We used an instrument known as a polylight, which is an artificial light source we often use. It aids us in detecting small amounts of trace evidence. It had been noted that there was a reddish-coloured stain in a couple of locations in the hallway, but they looked as though they might have been slightly diluted. It may well have been that this blood was in fact that of the offender, and he may well have made an attempt to clean up that blood from the floor, knowing full well that it was his own blood. We conducted presumptive testing for the presence of blood on the stains that we observed in the hallway, and they proved positive. So from that, a number of swabs were taken and sent away for further analysis.
In fact, 60-odd swabs were taken at the house, which included the tiny and unusual shaped blood spots from the wall behind Jennifer's bed.
Police haven't ruled out robbery as a motive after discovering a video recorder missing from the home.
The appearance of possible robbery at the house was isolated just to a couple of rooms. There was no evidence of major ransacking of the premises at all. The types of items that were stolen were things like kids' calculators and Sony games, this type of item. We did locate a cabinet from which it appeared that there was likely a video recorder missing, whereas more valuable items were left untouched. The circumstance was as such that there may have been a bungled burglary which led to the victims being attacked, or one possible scenario is that there's been an attempt made to hide the crime.
Police suspected this was a staged break and enter, and the post-mortem examination pointed to it being done by one offender.
I felt that in this particular case of all three De Gruchy deaths that there was a distinct possibility that there was one weapon used, one assailant. It was a very rapid attack on all three people, that it was quite a sustained attack on each one, and also very, very violent. The pattern of injuries was very similar in all three cases. Sarah had injuries which were very similar to Adrian's head injuries, about her forehead and the top of her skull. But she also had some injuries on her arms, particularly her right arm, that looked to me as if she'd put up a bit of a struggle. I think it reasonable to think that she raised her arm in some way because there was a distinctive line of bruising on the inner aspect of her right forearm that had a very distinctive appearance. It had a squared off end and a linear strip of bruising that I think was caused by a shaft-like or a cylindrical object.
The injury which we noted on the arm of Sarah, we also noted similar linear type injuries on the body of Adrian.
There are a number of quite distinctive bruises on the front of the chest that were about 15 centimetres or so in length, but on top of that in the upper chest region, just below the collarbone, was a very distinctive circular shaped bruise. And I had to ask myself, and I asked the police, what might have caused not only the injuries which were quite linear on the front of the chest, but which also might have caused the circular shaped bruise on the upper part of the chest. So after a bit of discussion, we wondered whether it was something like a tyre lever or a car jack, a wheel brace, something like that, which, if used in various ways, could have produced these injuries.
The police were desperate to find that murder weapon, but it was what they didn't find that would lead the forensic team down an unexpected path.
The thought then goes to where would a wheel brace normally be? The next conclusion is it would be in a motor vehicle, and there was only one motor vehicle there. Jennifer De Gruchy's car, which was inside the crime scene area.
On opening the boot, it was noted that the hatch, which normally contains the vehicle jack and wheel brace, was slightly ajar, which indicated that in all likelihood at some stage or other someone had accessed this small compartment. On opening the hatch, the car jack was in position. However, the actual wheel brace and the car jack handle were missing. So it was unusual. We searched the rear of the vehicle for the wheel brace, but it wasn't located. On examining the spare wheel, it still had the flash. There was just a small beading around the tyre surface, which was indicative that this particular wheel had never been on the road.
So there'd been never any need for those items to be used, and therefore there was never any need for them to be removed from where they'd been put in when the car had been manufactured.
The police confirmed that when Jennifer bought the car, the wheel brace was there.
Subsequently, we were able to be supplied with a similar type of wheel brace which would normally be with the vehicle. It was very similar indeed to the type of injuries which were inflicted on the deceased.
The injuries on the deceased bodies of Sarah and Adrian De Grucci told a story of a brutal and vicious attack. It also gave clues to the murder weapon, a wheel brace that police were desperate to find.
Police have appealed for help in their hunt for the killer of a family of 3 battered to death in a frenzied attack. Detectives were back at the Albion Park home today with scanning equipment to search for clues and the murder weapon. A post-mortem has revealed 40-year-old Jennifer De Grucci and her teenage children, Sarah and Adrian, were bludgeoned to death with a heavy metal object.
And what I am now asking is for assistance from the public to report anything of a suspicious nature that they observed or saw or heard of. The SES and Fire Brigade and police conduct a search of the backwater of Lake Illawarra, which backed up to the house where the Gruccis lived, just to see if anything had been tossed. We didn't find anything.
Meanwhile, Jennifer's car that had its wheel brace missing had become an exhibit and was taken to the police compound to be forensically examined.
As a result of that examination, we were able to elicit another piece of evidence that assisted us with our inquiries.
A small, what appeared to be a carpet fibre, a little over 1 centimetre or so in length, was located on the floor of the vehicle behind the driver's seat. The significance of the carpet was that it appeared to be a very similar colour to the missing carpet from the main bedroom of the premises. It certainly didn't appear to be similar to any other carpet which was actually, for example, which was fitted to the car itself. A sample of carpet was taken from the main bedroom of the premises, and it was sent away for comparison examination with the carpet fibre recovered from the vehicle to see if they'd come from the same origin. The results of the examination or the comparison of the carpet indicated that it was highly probable that they had originated from the same source.
Detectives tonight are again interviewing Mrs. De Grucci's husband and 19-year-old son, hoping they can provide new clues to the killings.
At any inquiry, at the initial stages, everyone is a suspect. And as is the case in this inquiry, in the initial stages, Wayne De Grucci was a suspect. He was interviewed about his movements the previous evening. To use the terminology that most people are aware of, he had alibis.
Wayne's alibi was that he was in Sydney, an hour and a half's drive from his home, playing golf that day and staying the night at his parents' place.
We were able to speak to those people and they confirmed his whereabouts.
However, other witnesses told another story.
There was information supplied to us that particular people had seen a Commodore which was consistent with the car that was normally used by Wayne De Grucci, and further that they saw a person in that car that was not inconsistent with the description of Wayne in the early hours of the morning. The only problem with that was that the car that was normally used by Wayne had been involved in a motor vehicle collision some days prior and was actually in the smash repairs, which we were able to confirm. That showed that what they were telling us wasn't right. Further to that, the times of death decided by the pathologist weren't consistent with the possibility that Wayne could have travelled down after retiring in Sydney and committing the crimes and then returning.
I felt that the time of death was between approximately 8 p.m. on the 12th of March up to about 1 a.m. on the 13th of March 1996. And my reasons for those times are that based on the examination of the bodies at the scene, the temperature of the bodies, when comparing it with the ambient temperature in the garage and in the house, as well as stiffening of the bodies and the gravitational settling of the blood. All three things in conjunction made me think that this was an approximate time for when these people might have met their deaths.
As police continued their search for the murder weapon, the missing piece of carpet, and the stolen items from the house, other important evidence was uncovered.
Not far from the body of Adrian was a red-coloured jerry can. The unusual thing was that the lid on the jerry can was actually in the open position, and examination revealed that there was a quantity of petrol within the jerry can. But it wasn't until we'd moved the body that it became evident that there was petrol on the deceased.
On Adrian's left side, there was some skin peeling, which I noticed, possibly suggestive that there might have been an attempt to partially douse Adrian in petrol and set him alight, and thereby setting the whole crime scene alight as well.
The fact that the deceased had petrol on his body and on his clothes, examination of the jerry can was very important, obviously.
The jerry can, along with other physical and biological evidence found at the scene, was now in laboratories being astutely examined. In one of those tubes, the DNA of the killer would be found. 3 members of the De Gruchy family had been murdered between 8 p.m. on the 12th of March 1996 and 1 a.m. on the following morning. Detectives believed the robbery was staged and the killings had been intentional. As yet, no murder weapon, the stolen items, nor the cut-out piece of carpet from Jennifer's bedroom had been found. But the jerry can that had been used to douse one of the victims was yielding results.
The usual procedure in any examination is to use just oblique lighting, a visual examination. We use a polylight to assist us with this. The fingerprints that appeared on the handle and the side of the handle of the petrol can were very good impressions. They didn't require further enhancement. They were photographed and used for comparison purposes.
To photograph the prints found on the underside of the handle, a mirror was placed underneath to capture the ridges that would be identical to one and one only person who had handled that can.
They then compared the fingerprints and identified the left, middle and ring fingers to be identical with the inked impressions of Matthew De Gruchy.
However, Matthew had used the jerry can often. The family cars were filled with petrol from this can, and Matthew was the one who did it. But what of the blood potentially recognised as being that of the killer? The diluted blood in the hallway and the small spots behind Jennifer's bed that were out of place with the other blood spatter evidence.
Detectives are waiting for the results of blood tests on a young man who said he found his family murdered in their home near Wollongong. Matthew De Gruchy and his father Wayne underwent the tests at a local hospital as they continue to help police investigate the triple murder.
The advantage of DNA is in the ability to discriminate quite easily between different individuals. Here we have a family, and I was able to easily distinguish through simple DNA testing the different people in the family, even though we were talking about a related group of individuals.
Dr. Gertz had received dozens of swabs from the house and needed to distinguish whose blood was whose, and whose was potentially the killer's.
Most of the blood matched that of the deceased, but the blood staining that was on the back of Jennifer's bed and the blood staining down the hallway had DNA that matched that of Matthew De Gruchy and not any other member of his family.
But how did Matthew's blood get there? His girlfriend Alyssa told police she had seen no injuries on him on the night of the murders.
Because Matthew had said he'd gone to his girlfriend's place, we then, as part of the investigation, obviously we spoke to his girlfriend. We were able to piece together a bit of a timeline.
Hey, Alyssa.
The police knew the couple had spoken with each other at 8 p.m.
He'd made an arrangement with her to attend there that evening, and he hadn't arrived, and so she made a phone call back to the De Gruchy household to speak to Matthew, and that was around 10 o'clock. That phone call went unanswered, so after that she went to bed. She wasn't aware if Matt was still coming up or not.
Although Matthew had said to his girlfriend that he would be there soon, he didn't arrive until 11 p.m, some 3 hours after speaking with her.
He went into the house and he just told her that the reason he'd been delayed is because his mother had asked him to stay back because they'd received some crank phone calls. He'd said that one of the persons that had sent the crank call said to him, there'll be 3 members of your family dead.
Matthew had never told police at any time that his family had been threatened on the night they were murdered. So to confirm Alyssa's statement, investigators would need to check the telephone records of the De Gruchy household to uncover the truth.
We were able to establish telephone calls that had been made because we were able to go back and speak to people that made those calls. However, the telephone calls that Matthew mentioned to his girlfriend about people ringing and making the threats, we weren't able to establish if that had actually taken place. If that had happened, do you think it was one of the first things that would have been said to us?
Well, this is an electronic recorded interview between Detective Sergeant DJ Sharkey and Matthew Wayne De Gruchy. When the call's made, I'll just try and clarify myself. The phone rings, you pick the phone off out of the cradle. How long a time after picking the phone up does the line stay open?
When you just hear the beeps.
So, are you saying that they hang up as soon as you pick the phone up? Is that what happens?
Well, as soon as you pick the phone up to put it to your ear, you just hear the beeps.
We were trying to establish whether the calls had connected. We were asking him, had he taken the call? We were asking questions along the lines of, did you hear anything? Was there beeping to show that the call had connected?
So you're saying that they become aware as soon as it's a connection, and then they hang up, is that right?
Well, I guess so, yes.
If that story had been true, Matthew would have had to have heard someone say that to him, and there would have had to been a connection on the telephone line, and there wasn't.
Had Matthew killed his mother, brother and sister? And if so, what was the possible motive?
Has there ever been an occasion in the past where you've had an argument with your mother over the use of the car?
Matthew De Gruchy's fingerprints and blood had been found at the crime scene. He told police that he had stayed at his girlfriend's on the night of the murders, arriving there late because of crank calls that had come into the De Gruchy house. But when police checked, there was no record of them. Police were continuing to interview their prime suspect, this time about the discovery of the bodies.
Now, in the statement you made last Wednesday, 13th, you spoke to the detective and he recorded in the statement about when you arrived home. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Well, can you just go over that again for me, please?
I arrived home at about 8:30, 8:35.
Hello?
Matthew told the police he returned home that morning to grab his wallet that he'd forgotten he'd left there, and then headed straight down to the local shops.
In the statement you say that you left the house and then went to get some cigarettes. Is that correct? Well, it doesn't record a nod. You're going to have to say yes or no.
Yes.
And then you returned to the house. Is that correct?
Yes, after the shop.
And that's what it says in your statement that you made that day, that you came back to the house from the shop after purchasing the cigarettes.
Yeah.
Well, what did you do then?
Opened the front door, walked inside, I went to the kitchen, realised it was quiet. I went back down hallway. Sort of hit Sarah's door. He just didn't really worry about it. And then opened my mum's door.
What did you do then?
Realised about me mum.
Did you... What happened then?
Well, I didn't know what had happened, so I just, breakdown and all that. Ran outside and then just to find help, and then I saw Steve across the road.
There's something wrong with Mum and Sarah.
In the statement obtained from Steve Bailey, he says that Matthew came out and said there's something up with Mum and Sarah.
There's something wrong with Mum and Sarah.
When interviewing Matthew, we spoke to him about what he did when he entered the house, and we specifically put it to him, did you go to your sister's bedroom?
Did you go to the lounge room at that time at all?
No.
Now, on that occasion, did you go to the dining room?
No.
Did you go to the kitchen?
No.
Did you go to your sister's bedroom?
When put to him, did he go into Sarah's bedroom? He said he didn't. If he hadn't have gone in there, how did he know that something had happened to Sarah?
Now, you drove to Alyssa's place, that's correct?
Yeah.
And you arrived there sometime around 11, is that correct?
Yeah.
And that's what you said in your previous statement?
Yeah.
Whereabouts did you... and you drove your mother's car, is that correct?
Yeah.
Matthew had used the family car on occasions and put a lot of kilometres on it, so we've been told. And as such, the family had decided that he could use his father's car, his father's work vehicle. Normally, Matthew's father would have been home on that evening, but that day he'd been staying in Sydney, and as such, Matthew couldn't use his father's car. So he had to use his mother's vehicle to travel.
Matthew was therefore the last person who had access to the car on the night of the murders.
Has there ever been an occasion in the past where you've had an argument with your mother over the use of the car?
I wouldn't call it an argument.
I asked Matthew in an interview if there'd ever been any arguments over his use of his mother's vehicle, and he said, well, I wouldn't call them arguments, but we'd had received information that there had been some dispute between Matthew and his mother over the use of the car.
Has there ever been an occasion when your mother has declined your use of the car and you have threatened her with any physical force?
No.
Has there ever been an occasion where you've assaulted your mother?
No.
So Matthew was given the opportunity to confess to his involvement.
That concludes the interview.
He didn't take that opportunity.
Oh, no.
We allowed him to leave the police station. Then we went about our work to gather the evidence to show that he was the person that committed those crimes.
Without any witnesses, the detectives and forensic investigators would need to put together a whole jigsaw of circumstantial evidence. They already had Matthew's fingerprints on the jerry can, and they had found his blood in the house. And Matthew had been the last person to use his mother's car.
I received a carpet fibre that was found in the back of Jennifer DeGrucci's car. The fibre was about 3 centimetres long, and what was interesting about it was right at the end of it was a small red-brown stain. Because it was so small, there wasn't a lot of testing we could do with it, so what we did was we cut a small amount of that staining off and put it into a tube to pursue it with DNA testing. The tests on the carpet fibre found that the DNA could not have come from anybody in the family but Matthew DeGrucci.
That fibre had matched the carpet fibres in Jennifer's room, and police speculated how Matthew's blood came to be there.
He possibly could have bled as a result of a nosebleed through pressure. We've made inquiries, and that is a possibility that some people can bleed through the nose just as a result of the pressure that they're under. We really couldn't say how it got there. Suffice to say that it was Matthew's blood.
9 days after the murders, Matthew was attending the funeral of his mother, sister and brother. It would take another 2 months before police would get the vital breakthrough and the last piece of the jigsaw they needed to complete their case. It had now been 2 months since Jennifer, Sarah and Adrian had been bludgeoned to death. Matthew DeGrucci, the prime suspect for their murders, was now spending time between the family home and that of his girlfriend. The police were still gathering their evidence, and lucky for them, a group of teenagers had an inquisitive nature.
I was about 16 at the time. A couple of mates lived right near this old quarry. It had a big dam in there, and this one particular day we were deciding to make a jump that went into the dam. We climbed up a bit higher onto this big ledge so we could actually see if we'd see how deep the water was, noticing something red in the water.
I'm not going in there. Neither am I. You can. Stinks.
That's only water.
My mate walked into the water to grab the bag. He then started walking back towards us as we all met him to grab the bag off him, as we all wanted to know what was in there. And as we opened it, there was a couple of bits of carpet, looked like what was squashed paper, and a hammer, which we actually decided to keep the hammer, and threw the bag back in the water as we had no need for it.
The boys had found the bag only days after the murders. So when it came to the attention of the police 2 months later, they immediately drained the dam to find that evidence.
Detectives searched a dam at Woonona. It's alleged they found a number of items, many identified as having come from the DeGrucci household, including a video recorder, compact discs and a lady's purse with a photo licence of Jennifer DeGrucci.
The fact that we'd located the property was a big plus for us, because it certainly indicated to us that we were on the right path.
Earlier on, when Matthew had provided the list of items stolen from the house, it did appear a little bit odd to us that he was able to be so specific. Then when the items were found in the dam, it tended to confirm those suspicions, as the majority of items listed in fact turned up. There was a calculator which had the name A. DeGrucci, which is obviously Adrian's calculator, which was on the list as being stolen. There was also a lady's wallet with paperwork belonging to Jennifer DeGrucci. There's a video recorder and a number of other items, including a number of pieces of carpet which appeared as though they may well have been the carpet pieces that had been cut from the bedroom floor.
So did Matthew have time to kill 3 people, stage a robbery, cut the carpet, wipe the floor, drive to the dam to dispose of incriminating evidence, and then get to his girlfriend's by 11 p.m?
After discovery of the dam and the proximity of the dam to Alyssa's place, I then caused a couple of the members of my team to travel from the home of Matthew to the dam, then to Alyssa's. And what I got them to do was to travel at different speeds so I could see how long it would take just to satisfy ourselves that that was capable and possible to be done, which we did. It was certainly within the time frame.
Apart from the missing items from the house that were found in the dam and bag, another crucial piece of evidence existed.
There was a small plastic resealable bag located with the property, which appeared to contain a number of band-aids and what appeared to be small torn pieces of paper. It was visible on the paper that there was some sort of handwriting.
I think there were 13 pieces of paper in all that needed to be reconstructed. The document had been moist, it had been in water, and that some of the letters had actually bled into the fibres of the paper. When I was able to reconstruct the document, There were a number of words on that document, commencing with open gate, open blinds, mum, Sarah, Adrian, hit self with pole, cut somewhere with knife.
It appeared to us once the note was put together, it was a checklist of things that needed to be done to make it appear that someone else had committed the crimes in the Grucci household. After the actual reconstruction of the documents, I was able to then compare the handwriting on that reconstructed document with known samples of Matthew de Grucci's handwriting. There were about 12 points altogether that were fairly strong, similar features appearing between the two. I was of the opinion that it was probable that Matthew de Grucci wrote the questioned writing, in that it was more likely than not that he did than he didn't. We arrested him and charged him with the murder of his mother, brother and sister.
7 Nightly News with Ross Simons. Good evening. An 18-year-old Wollongong man has been refused bail on charges of killing his mother, brother and sister. Matthew de Grucci was arrested after a 3-month investigation into the triple murder.
Matthew claims he spent the night at his girlfriend's and only discovered the bodies when he returned home in the morning. Crown Prosecutor Paul Conlon claims DNA evidence links Matthew to the murder scene.
I think the finding of that carpet fibre with blood on it, which ultimately proved to be the blood or consistent with the blood of Matthew de Grucci, was very significant in this case when we came to look at the fact that pieces of carpet had been cut out of the main bedroom. I commented to the jury that the person responsible for these killings had left his calling card on that carpet. All of the facts and circumstances in that case ultimately pointed in one direction and one direction alone, and that was to the guilt of Matthew de Grucci.
A man is facing life in jail after being found guilty of murdering his mother, brother and sister. Matthew de Grucci was just 18. The jury ruled he bashed them to death at the family home and then tried to make it look like a robbery.
I noticed that when the verdict was brought down, there was no reaction from him at all. He maintained a bit of a steely glare down towards his feet, and that was a pose which he maintained throughout the course of the trial.
Given that we had no murder weapon and no apparent motive for the crime, the forensic aspects of this case were so powerful that they were able to prove beyond reasonable doubt the involvement of Matthew de Grucci in the commission of these 3 murders.
2.5 years after the murder of his mother, sister and brother, Matthew de Grucci was sentenced to a minimum jail term of 21 years and a maximum of 28. His earliest release from prison would be in 2017, when he is 39 years old.
Whether it was because his mother wouldn't lend him the car or any other reason or disputes previously, I don't know. All I know is that all the evidence we had pointed towards Matthew and didn't point towards anyone else. So the only person that really knows why he did what he did is Matthew.
When a murder occurs, homicide detectives must explore every possible theory, no matter how remote they may seem. And in this investigation, there were many. Speculation arose about gangs, prostitution and love triangles, to name but a few. However, only one theory would turn into fact.
2 firefighters told me that over a number of days there'd been backburning operations being conducted along the edge of the national park. They were burning off this particular area alongside the roadway, and as they were doing that, they came across what looked like an old suitcase that someone had dumped from the road. They saw that it was still smouldering from the effects of the fire. They also saw that part of the exterior of the bag had been burnt away and some of the items in the bag were also still smouldering. And that's when they went a little bit closer to the suitcase and they saw that there was a plastic bag in there that was in a round shape. It was at that stage that they made the disturbing find of a human skull within that bag.
The case was several metres from the side of the road. It was a fairly steep incline. I proceeded to record that area by way of taking photographs. The skull itself was in one corner of the suitcase within the remains of a white shopping bag. The size of the skull indicated that it was a small child. I had to go down several metres further into the bush to get a view of the case in the road, and doing that I've noticed a second case which was in an area that was unburnt by the fire. Seeing the second case so close to the first case, I considered it would have to be related, although I hoped there wouldn't be a similar finding inside that case as there was in the smaller case.
The two cases were carefully removed and put onto a tarpaulin on the edge of the road for further examination.
The second suitcase was unzipped, and as we began to remove the contents, we immediately saw the remains of an adult female. It was certainly something that was totally unexpected. You know, all of a sudden, we having just got the murder of a child, we've got now a double murder. We began to look closer at the deceased, and I saw that there was also a shopping plastic bag around the head, very similar to how we had located the skull in the first suitcase. As we moved down towards the hand area, we saw that her hands had been bound by a twine. A length of that continued to run further down towards the bottom of the corpse, and had also bound the feet together so that she was effectively hogtied.
We then went back to the smaller of the two cases and we removed the remainder of the clothing. While we were doing that, we noted that they're all folded as if the bag had been packed.
As these items were being one by one itemised and removed from the suitcase, the crime scene investigator, all of a sudden he's come across this third shopping bag, and he's began to lift it out of the suitcase, and it was quite evident that it was something cylindrical and, you know, quite evident, I think even at that stage, that it was a human skull, a third human skull. I remember just looking around and there was just absolute silence. I think everyone was just gobsmacked. Yeah, they couldn't believe that here we already had two deceased persons in these suitcases, and now it appeared that there was going to be a third.
Seeing that the first child in its condition was a little upsetting, but seeing two small children in one suitcase with their ankles bound and plastic bags over the head, for some there was quite upsetting.
7 Nightly News with Chris Barth.
Tonight, bush graves, a police search underway after the discovery of 3 human skulls. Good evening. The discovery of the remains of 3 bodies sparked a major police operation in New South Wales bushland tonight. 3 skulls have been removed for forensic examinations while police check missing persons files.
The gruesome discovery was made near Heaton's Lookout, 11 kilometres south of Cessnock and on the edge of the Watagan State Forest. The gender and the cause of death are unknown. The bodies could have been at the scene for years.
While the local media speculated that the bodies could be those of several missing women, a post-mortem was being conducted on the female and the 2 small children to determine the cause of death.
Part of the examination included X-raying that identified no obvious signs of trauma, no obvious evidence of gunshot injury or projectiles, either in the remains or in the remains of the suitcases. They looked fairly carefully for evidence of maybe a knife wound, for small nicks and cuts along the edges of bones.
We weren't able to detect any bones broken by the impact of a heavy implement. So they gave up no real evidence as to a cause of death. We then reverted back to the fact that the head of each of the 3 victims had been encased in a plastic shopping bag, which appeared to have been tied around the neck of each of those 3 individuals. It was a reasonable assumption that each of the 3 had been asphyxiated, effectively suffocated, by having plastic bags closed tightly over their heads. When you think of it, a very, very cruel death. We were at a stage of frantically trying to find out who these people were from the little bit of information we had. I was running through my own mind, have we had any mothers and children in the local area go missing that we've been looking for a while? I was unable to think of anything, and equally so the other police that were with me couldn't conjure up any thoughts of something like that having occurred. So we're starting to think, well, are these people being brought here from some other area?
Now we'll move on to the Hunter Valley in New South Wales, where police are carrying out a major search in the Watagan State Forest after the discovery of 3 human skulls. Reporter Richard Lenarduzzi joins us. So they think that it is the bones or the skulls of a woman and 2 children, is that right?
And speculation is rife at the moment as to who the skulls may belong to. I can tell you that Homicide Squad police are sifting through dozens of missing persons records, but they're focusing on the case of a young woman, her son and daughter, who vanished from Sydney's northern suburbs late last year.
10 months earlier, 31-year-old Susan Park, her 3-year-old son Andrew, and daughter Amy, who was only 18 months old, had been reported missing by her sister-in-law, Mina Park. Detectives investigating the triple murder were now hoping she could help them confirm the identity of the 3 and give them any leads to solve the case.
All right, as you are aware, last week the body of a female and 2 children were discovered in the Cessnock area. What I'd like to do is show you some photographs of items that were found with those bodies and see if you can tell me anything about those items. Can you tell me anything about that?
That's Susan's sweater. It's one of her favourites. She wore it many times when we went out. I have many photos of her wearing this.
Do you know if you've seen that particular teddy bear previously?
This teddy bear, my mother, Andrew's grandmother, had bought a white teddy bear about this size for Andrew's birth.
Well, and lastly, I'll show you a photograph of an earring.
I believe I've seen that same earring she wore on the day we went out to shopping. That was about 5 days before she disappeared.
The 2 had remained good friends, even though Mina's brother Nick had been officially separated from Susan for a month at the time she went missing.
How close a relationship did your brother have with his ex-wife and children?
He would go back and see the children every week or every other week. But I don't know whether they were close enough.
When police first began their investigation into Susan and the children's disappearance, which was 10 months before their bodies were found, they had gone to the flat where Susan lived, and her husband, Nick Park, was there.
I asked Mr. Park where Susan and the children were, and Mr. Park told us that they were with their uncle in Queensland.
They actually flew to Brisbane. They're staying with their uncle at the moment. We want to sell everything and start fresh up there.
He was selling the goods in the unit and planned on joining them the following day. At that point, we weren't too concerned. We thought it was quite a reasonable explanation. We thought, well, we'll go back and we'll make some inquiries to find out whether or not that was true.
Will you be here the rest of the day, Mr. Park?
Yeah, sure. I'll be packing all day, so I will be here.
And we had contacted Susan's uncle, and he had no knowledge of her whereabouts and, in fact, hadn't spoken to her for about 6 months. At that time, we thought that it was a bit strange that he would lie to us about something like that. We decided that we would go back. There was no answer at this time. We looked through the window, were unable to see anybody inside the unit, so we decided we'd do a bit of a canvass of the local units, other residents, to see whether or not they might have any information which could help us.
One neighbour told them that the last time she had seen Susan was 11 days before. Susan had mentioned to her that she and Nick might be getting back together. Nick had left Susan because of another woman, but he now, apparently, wanted to make amends.
But he never told that there was another woman involved until the last minute, until about September 96, which was a month before they disappeared.
He had told Susan that he was actually working night shifts and staying at a house with a friend, and that was the reason for him not being home overnight.
So Susan had no idea that Nick had a new girlfriend, even though he'd been going out with her for some 11 months?
That's right.
I'm aware that Susan allegedly tried to take her own life in around September last year.
Yes.
Is that around the same time as she learnt that Nick had a new girlfriend?
That's about a week after. And at that time, she attempted suicide, I think, by drinking very important alcohol, a lot of it at once. And She rang me about half an hour before she attempted. I went over and rang the emergency because I thought that, something would have happened to the children.
Police at the time of the original investigation believed it may be possible that Susan had killed the children and then herself. Of course, finding the bodies 10 months later in the state they were in meant that wasn't an option. But there were many other theories about what happened to Susan, Andrew and Amy, and those theories were still being explored.
Can you think of any reason why a Korean crime gang, if there is such a thing, would have reason to harm Susan and the children?
Is that a spider? No! That's good. That's a smart boy.
Susan had been married to Nick Park for 4 years. They had met in Brisbane, where Susan worked in her uncle's Chinese restaurant.
Susan was actually of Chinese descent. Nick was Korean. Susan, being of Chinese descent, was, I believe, considered by Nick's mother to be not appropriate for her son. However, Nick's mother was very fond of the grandchildren, so that made up the difference, I think, at that time.
However, 1 month before Susan disappeared, she learnt that her husband had been seeing another woman.
Do you know, Mina, of anyone who would have had any reason to harm Susan and the children?
At the time she disappeared, she was very depressed and she was very enraged, I think, about the girlfriend.
Let me in!
Because they had a lot of fights between them, and she went to see Nick, where the girlfriend and Nick was living together in Ashfield, at least 2 times, as I know.
He's my husband!
And there was a lot of confrontation. Nick's girlfriend might have a vengeful motive. That was probably the only person that she ever had fights with. She was a very gentle person.
Nick's girlfriend was only one consideration. Police also learnt that Nick was an avid gambler.
I think he was trying to fill up some gap in his life with gambling habit. Just like filling up with the alcohol or drugs.
Less than a year before Susan went missing, the temporary Sydney casino opened. Its arrival not only attracted her husband, but there were rumours that loan sharks had also gathered there to prey on unlucky gamblers.
Gang punishment, Korean style. These scenes were filmed in the back streets of King's Cross earlier this year. It shows 2 young men forced to their knees in a mock show of respect to their attacker, then punched and kicked over money lent for gambling. Korean gangs specialise in loan sharking.
Loan sharking is an insidious activity, and if there are gangs involved, we want to see them smashed, and we want to see them out of the casino.
There's reportedly 2 rival gangs fighting over the rights to loan shark at the casino. Both charge exorbitant rates to finance gambling debts. Death is the ultimate price for non-payment.
Since Susan and the children's disappearance, there has been some media speculation in relation to Korean crime gangs in association with their disappearance. Can you think of any reason why a Korean crime gang, if there is such a thing, would have reason to harm Susan and the children?
I know for sure there is a gang, but I don't know what scale and where they're based. But if there are larger scale gangs with money, lending money and distortion and that sort of things, I don't know if there is any personal reason that why Susan and children would be hurt. If she had been hurt by people, maybe if my brother had borrowed money from, it could be possible.
Do you know of any person he owed a large amount of money to?
Not personally, because he was very secretive about his debts. But as far as I knew, if he was in really bad debt, he would usually ask for some money from my mother or myself or other friends.
Right, do you know who he gambled with? Was it any one group of people or person in particular?
I think most of the times, as far as I know, he was by himself.
Nick's gambling debts were one of the first things the original missing persons investigators followed up. At that time, little was known about Korean gangs in or around the casino. So Detective Letchford sought intelligence from overseas, especially America.
The intelligence that came back was suggested there that loan sharks have forced a person who owed them money to force their wife, their girlfriend or their daughter to work in either sweatshops or in brothels to repay the debt.
Police needed to speak with Nick immediately. But when they went to the flat Nick shared with his girlfriend, neither of them were home.
At this stage, we were very alarmed. We took out what's called a pass alert just in case Nick was going to leave the country. That afternoon, we received a phone call from Customs, and they told us that Nick was attempting to leave the country with a female.
We had no offence for which he could be detained at that time. We still weren't sure where Susan and the children were. We requested the Australian Federal Police if they could board the aircraft and perhaps one last time ask Mr Park where his wife and the children were. Mr Park again stated his family was in Queensland and that he was returning to Korea to visit a sick relative.
And that he would be returning in 10 days, returning to Sydney. And the federal agent checked his ticket out, and his ticket was in fact a return ticket.
And we had no choice at that time but to let him go. After receiving this information, Detective Spur and I both were of the opinion that he was on the run. He had done something or was aware of something that had happened and was fleeing from it.
A worldwide hunt involving Interpol is underway after the identification of 3 bodies dumped in a New South Wales forest. Police say the victims are a Sydney mother and her 2 children. Detectives are searching for the woman's husband.
The mother and children disappeared from their Eastwood home unit last October. Interpol's being called in to help find Mrs Park's estranged husband Sung, a heavy gambler who owed money to loan sharks.
12 days after Susan and the children had last been seen by their neighbour, Susan's estranged husband, Nick Park, and his girlfriend Demi had flown to Korea.
We believed at that time there was possibly 2 reasons as to why he was fleeing the country. Number 1, he had killed his wife and children, and number 2, perhaps Susan was being held against her will over some gambling debts of her brother by some Asian gangs, either as a hostage to some late payments or some money owed by Mr Park, or possibly even placed into a brothel to pay off the debts that Mr Park had gathered over the years.
Are you aware if Susan was ever a prostitute?
No. She had a debt with her uncle when she came to Australia. She had to pay off more than $20,000. She had worked day and night at the restaurants to pay off their debt. I know that she did pay off, and from my knowledge, she would not work as anything other than legal way to pay off whatever, if she had to pay off her husband's debt.
Do you know if that's a common practice in the Korean community?
It's not common practice as such, as you described, but I know for a fact there is people selling people for some purposes, or being kidnapped or being sold for debt.
If such a situation did eventuate, would the children be involved in that?
Sometimes they do involve children, and they do kidnap children as well as adults.
The reason for that, is that for monetary return? For the return of the people?
It would most probably to do with debt.
We utilised the services of Task Force Oak, which was the Asian crime task force at the time. At our request, they attended a number of brothels in the Sydney metropolitan area with a photograph of Susan in an effort to perhaps locate her in these premises. We had no joy from that. Nobody at these premises recognised Susan's photograph.
While this theory could not be ruled out at that time, it wasn't furthering the missing persons investigation. And so the detectives moved on to their next scenario, that Nick had murdered his own family.
We obtained a search warrant to look at Mrs Park's unit at Eastwood. The unit was pretty much in the same state as it was when we were there last time. There was no sheets on the bed, the wardrobes were empty, the furniture was packed in a way that perhaps it was ready to be moved. It actually looked like Mr Park had not even been back since we had spoken to him.
We searched for signs of anything sinister that may have happened. There was no sign of any struggle. There was no sign of any blood or any other DNA material that we could locate.
Police then moved on to the flat Nick shared with Demi, but the result was the same.
We made some inquiries in relation to Susan's bank accounts, which is what we normally do when people go missing.
Susan had an account with the Commonwealth Bank, and they told us that the account had been activated on the 24th October, which was about a week after the last sighting of Susan and the children.
$300 had been withdrawn over the counter, which was the entire amount in Susan's account. Detectives also discovered that the children's account had been cleared of $400. It suggested that Susan may be alive. But what was interesting was the fact that the transactions had taken place at a branch that Susan had no reason to attend.
The branch was at Ashfield, which raised our concerns as to why, if it was Susan, she would be making this withdrawal from the Ashfield branch. The only link that she had with Ashfield was that her husband was seeing Demi, who resided in that suburb.
Detectives requested the bank for the CCTV tapes for the purpose of attempting to identify who it was that had made the withdrawal from Susan's account. So it could then find out, yes, Susan is alive and well, or that was somebody else making the withdrawal.
As the detectives waited for the footage, they received a phone call from Susan's neighbour. On the day that Nick had been at Susan's unit selling the furniture, she had noticed that he had thrown a number of documents into a rubbish skip. She thought, with all the police activity, it was worth a look. Inside, she found a letter from a car rental company directed at Nick.
We found out that Nick hired a car on the 19th of October, which was 2 days after the time that Susan was last seen, and he had not returned the car when he was supposed to.
When the car was hired, the manager told police that Nick was with an Asian woman. Police then showed him a photo of the couple, and he identified Susan as that woman.
She's the one, absolutely certain. She's the one.
And it was extremely important that we located that car to identify who'd been in it, fingerprint it, carried out all forensic service investigations on it to see if any foul play had taken place, whether the vehicle was used to transport bodies or whether Susan and the children are still alive and had just been driven to some safe location.
Because Mr Park had left the country, we thought a good place to start would be the airport. The vehicle was found and escorted by police to a holding yard. In examining the vehicle, we were looking for anything which might indicate that Susan or the children were in the car. Things such as hair, blood stains, any items of clothing, any identification which might assist us in identifying who had been in the vehicle and what had taken place, if anything, in that vehicle.
There was nothing to indicate to us what had happened to Susan or, in actual fact, whether she'd ever been in the vehicle. Our hopes were dashed pretty well because that was the last avenue where possibly she may have been in the car and driven to some other location. We realised then that Susan and the children had met foul play.
Susan and the children were missing, presumed dead. Susan's husband, Nick Park, had hired a car, left it at the airport and flown to Korea with his girlfriend Demi. It was no surprise to the police that he hadn't returned to Australia after 10 days, as he had promised.
It was a real possibility at this point in the investigation that Mr Park could get away with murder. We had no bodies, we had no evidence to suggest there had been a crime. There was nothing to link Mr Park with their disappearance.
But from past history of such inquiries, eventually something does turn up, be it 12 months or 15 years down the track, something will eventually turn up. And as in this case, it did.
The remains were found 6 metres off the road, all within a 20-metre radius. According to locals, the area was once used as an illegal rubbish tip.
Very rocky, caves and things down there. There's no access at all. So whoever's dumped it down there sort of had the intentions of no one coming across it for years, I think.
Interpol's been called in to help find Mrs. Park's estranged husband, Sung. Mr. Park flew out of the country 6 days after his wife and children vanished from their Eastwood home last October. Police say it's possible the family became the victims of a payback by Asian crime gangs who were after her husband.
From my first involvement on the very first day, there was an inference that crime gang had some involvement in the deaths of Susan and the children. It became obvious to us that we either had to confirm that aspect of the investigation or refute it. If not, it would have been raised later at trial as a possibility. We enlisted the support of 2 specialist investigators from the South East Asian Crime Command. There was nothing to indicate from any of their inquiries that Nick Park had an extensive association with crime gangs. There was nothing to indicate that he'd ever borrowed large amounts of money from loan sharks that frequented the casino at that time. And there was nothing to indicate that any crime gang had any involvement in the disappearance and subsequent murder of Susan and the children.
With that theory put to bed, police concentrated on finding evidence to link their prime suspect, Nick Park, to the murders.
From the outset of the investigation, we didn't have a crime scene. We couldn't prove where Susan, Andrew and Amy had been initially murdered. It was obvious to us that they'd been transported to the scene where they'd been found, obviously in the suitcases.
Inside those cases were clothing and other items that belonged to the 3 victims and came from their flat. Now the plastic bags that had been used as murder weapons were adding to an argument that the murder took place there.
We were lucky enough to find batch numbers on those plastic bags. We were able to identify a shop at the Macquarie Centre at Marsfield where those bags had been supplied. We subsequently showed photographs of Susan to the proprietor of that shop, who did recognise her as being quite a regular shopper, and that led us to believe that Susan, Andrew and Amy had been murdered at the Eastwood unit.
The only other person to have access to the flat was Nick Park. However, police needed to find further direct links between Nick, those items, and the place the bodies had been found.
After we located the suitcase, we noticed that we had some tyre tracks that were dried into the road verge. The time of year it had been fairly dry, so I was reasonably confident these tracks had been made sometime before because they were quite hardened. And I'm thinking, is this tyre track related to the vehicle that possibly pulled up here?
The car hired by Nick was repossessed and re-examined by the police. But the tyres did not match those at the scene, nor were there any signs that the suitcases had been in the boot.
If we could prove that the suitcases at some stage had been in the boot of that vehicle, then we've had a very strong case against Nick.
But their return to the car meant that they re-interviewed the manager. This time they showed him 16 photos of different Asian women. And instead of picking Susan, he went directly to a photo of Demi.
It wasn't a surprise to us that Demi was with Nick at the time the vehicle was hired. Whether Demi was aware of the purpose the vehicle was being hired was unknown to us at that stage.
We didn't believe at that time that she had any direct involvement in their disappearance, but we were of the opinion that perhaps information that she might have obtained from Mr. Park, seen or overheard, could assist our inquiry.
Demi was not only seen at the car rental place, but also at the bank. When police viewed the CCTV footage on the day that $300 was taken from Susan's account, Demi was there. Police then obtained the withdrawal slip from that day and the ones used to close the children's accounts a few days before.
Susan, the mother, was the only signatory to those accounts. We subsequently subjected them to handwriting analysis by a police expert who confirmed that the signatures on the documents were obvious forgeries.
Those slips were then sent to the forensic laboratory to see if any fingerprint could be lifted.
When I received the forms, because they were a paper document, which is a porous surface, I determined that the most effective means of developing latent fingerprints on those items was using a process called ninhydrin. Ninhydrin is also a very sensitive chemical reagent that reacts with porous surfaces. On the document in the name of Andrew Park, I could see that there was a clearly identifiable palm print at the bottom of the document, which appeared to be a left palm.
Demi had no criminal record, and so there were no prints on file to compare. Nick, on the other hand, was a different story.
Nick Park, in his younger days, had come under notice of police for a minor fraud matter. His fingerprints were on our records. When we identified the palm print from the withdrawal slip of Andrew Park, that was cross-matched against our database, and it was indicated that the palm print was that of Nick Park's. This confirmed to us that Nick had been involved in the closure of the children's accounts the day after we believed that they had been murdered.
In those days after, police confirmed that Nick had also sold furniture, had pawned goods.
And I just wanted to find out. I mean, we paid $50 on the 14th.
And had even asked for a refund on monies paid in advance for his children's childcare.
Is that possible for us to get a refund for that?
Whilst it was always a possible motive for Susan and the children's murder that Nick was trying to raise money quickly, the amounts of money Nick was obtaining from the sale of these items was quite small. It seemed a fairly long bow to draw that a guy would kill his wife and 2 children for the purposes of raising perhaps a couple of $1,000s.
Police needed to find a motive, and in most homicides it comes down to love or money. And as police continued their investigation into gathering enough evidence to have Nick Park extradited from Korea, it was clear which one it was.
To your knowledge, are Nick and his girlfriend still living together or still seeing each other in Korea?
One of the things you look for in an investigation is to why a crime was committed. We had trouble coming to the terms with the fact that a father had killed their 3-year-old son and 2-year-old daughter. He could have always left Australia and travelled to Korea with Demi without harming Susan and the children. It became obvious to us that some catalyst to the violence must have taken place. So a large part of our investigation was conducted in an attempt to try and identify that catalyst.
When Susan had overdosed on her ginseng wine, she had been admitted to hospital and came under the care of a psychologist.
The psychologist had indicated to Susan she should try and look after herself and her future and that of the children. The psychologist had urged Susan to apply for child support and had facilitated putting her in contact with the child support agency to try and claim ongoing support from Nick. We contacted the child support agency. They prepared a letter addressed to Nick Park at the Ashfield address on the 15th of October, which was posted on the 16th of October and was most likely received at the Ashfield unit on the 17th of October. It was considered at that stage that could have been the catalyst for Nick to confront Susan.
While it was all circumstantial, police believed they had enough evidence to extradite Nick Park from South Korea to face the charges of murder. They just had to find him.
To your knowledge, are Nick and his girlfriend still living together or still seeing each other in Korea?
From what I heard from my brother, they had broken up a while ago.
Nick's contact with his family was sporadic.
He rang me on reverse charge in May or early June. At that time, he had started to work in James Rose English School in Bijangbur in Korea.
When Korean police checked, he had left there and gone underground.
For the purpose of this interview, can you state your full name?
My name is Song On Park.
But perseverance paid off. And exactly 1 year and 7 months after police believed Nick Park had killed his wife and children, he was back in Australia facing those charges.
Would you agree that early this morning Detective Woods and I escorted you back from Seoul in the Republic of Korea?
Yes.
And we arrived back in Australia at about 1:45 this morning?
Yeah.
And then we came straight here to the Surrey Hills Police Station?
Yes, we did.
Well, what I propose to do is ask you some questions in relation to the alleged murder of your wife and your son Andrew Park and your daughter Amy Park. Do you have any objections to answering those questions?
Yes, today I'm not don't answer any questions today.
So is it the case, Mr. Park, that at this stage, under legal advice, you don't wish to answer any questions?
Yeah, this.
All right. Is there anything further at all you wish to say about this matter?
No.
While Nick wasn't talking, his ex-girlfriend, who was still in Korea, was happy to tell police what she knew.
Demi told us that on the 17th of October, Nick received a letter from the Child Support Agency at the Ashfield unit. Upon opening this letter and seeing that Susan was applying for ongoing child support for her and the children, Nick became enraged. Demi indicated that Nick went to the Eastwood unit. He rang Demi at about 3 or 4 a.m. on the morning of the 18th of October, where he told Demi that their problems had finished and everything would be okay. Early in the morning, Nick then returned to the Ashfield unit, where Demi was waiting for him.
On that day, Nick put in the withdrawal papers for the children's accounts, leaving his palm print. The following day, Demi admitted she was with Nick when he hired the car.
Demi told us that after they'd hired the motor vehicle, they attended the flat at Eastwood that night. Demi stayed in the car while Nick went to the unit. He returned to the car with 2 suitcases. Nick placed those suitcases into the boot of the vehicle. They then drove to an area north of Sydney. She was unsure of the exact location as to where they stopped, but she described a bushland area with a dirt road. Nick stopped the vehicle and threw the 2 suitcases into the bush. They then returned to Sydney. Demi confessed that she had attended the Commonwealth Bank and withdrawn $300 from Susan's account by forging her signature, which was all done at Nick's request.
Nick accumulated $2,225 after he callously murdered his family and flew out of Australia believing he would never return.
We'd always believed that the money Nick had raised from closing the bank accounts, selling the furniture and pawning property had been used to purchase airline tickets for himself and Demi to travel to Korea. However, Demi indicated in this interview that the money had actually been used for Nick to go to the casino and gamble.
Demi was offered immunity from the fraud charges if she gave evidence against Nick at his trial. However, she was given no indemnity should the decision be made to prosecute her for any involvement in the murders. Staying in Korea was the safe option, but Demi attended court of her own accord.
The fact that Demi returned to Australia of her own free will to give evidence in the trial of Nick confirmed to me that she had no involvement in the murders of Susan and the children.
No charges were laid against Demi, and she is now back living in Korea. Her witness account, along with the other circumstantial evidence, was enough for a jury to find Nick guilty of killing Susan, Andrew and Amy.
It was very pleasing to see that that the perpetrator in this case was brought back to Australia, stood trial, found was convicted and jailed.
Nick Park was sentenced to 26 years. His earliest parole date is 2017.
This would have to have been one of the most brutal, vicious killings that I can recall. I've seen persons shot dead. I've seen them bashed. But to murder 2 little children and the mother, I think that's one of the worst incidents I've ever known about as far as murder goes. I hope the bastard rots in hell.